Professor Mintz, you just gave a lecture here at the Institute on the new tax reform in the US. As an overall estimation, is that a good thing, the US tax reform, or is it a bad thing?
Well, I think from the world perspective, and I think generally the U.S. reform is positive in terms of economic growth. And the IMF has noted that yesterday. I think some of the other estimates have shown that the U.S. economy is probably going to benefit from a tax reform that leads to, especially to major reduction in taxes on investment that will allow for more economic growth, and that's going to be a benefit to other parts of the world. There'll be increase in their demand for exports and things like that. So from that perspective, it's a very good thing.
But there seems to be another perspective if you answer like that.
Well, I think there's another aspect to this, and that's what people worry about most is productivity and their ability in the long run to attract investment and what businesses are going to do. And the United States has followed an economic strategy, I would argue, for the past year. Since Trump got elected as President of the United States, and that is pursuing deregulation and tax reform to make the United States much more attractive for investment. And this tax reform is dramatic in that it really does lead to a major reduction in taxes where the United States, instead of being one of the high tax countries of the world, has now become kind of the middle of the pack.
But is the U.S. now a tax haven, so a low tax country?
No, I wouldn't call that, because even with their, once you include the state income tax rates, the corporate income tax rate is 26%, which is close to the average around the world, and so it's not that much. I wouldn't say that it's become a tax haven, but certainly it's become much more competitive with this tax reform. And between the lower corporate income tax rate and expensing of machinery investments, there's a very dramatic reduction in tax burdens on new investments in most sectors in the United States. And so it's going to be, many businesses are going to say, do I invest in the United States, let's say to serve the North American market or the international market, or stay where I am? For Canadian businesses, where I come from, that's a huge issue because we're a small market of only 35 million. For Europe and Germany, it's a bit different because they're a very big market themselves, and so maybe that's a little bit less of a concern, but it's certainly still going to be important because a number of U.S. businesses or European businesses might decide that they put more operations in the United States. But the other big change, I think, has been generally most businesses with U.S. operations, whether foreign or U.S. companies themselves, over the past number of years have really had two rules. Number one, put your costs in the United States where you get this very high corporate income tax reduction because of the high rate, and the second was push your profits out of the United States to avoid the high corporate income tax rate. And so they would put more debt in the United States. They would put more of their costs, like general administrative costs in the United States and things like that, but try to get the profits out of the United States. That is now completely flipped because of not just the corporate rate reduction and the expensing, but also a number of tightening measures, especially on interest expenses and other items that many companies are now going to be saying, okay, we should be putting profits in the United States and put costs into especially countries with higher corporate income tax rates like Germany.
Where does that leave the governments of Canada and Germany? What should they do now?
Well, for Canada, it's absolutely really crucial because we're America's biggest trading partner still. And certainly for us, one third of our GDP is our exports to the United States. So it's a huge issue for Canada. And between the competitiveness aspects and the trade policy issues that are now being discussed around NAFTA, there's a lot of anxiety in the business community right now in Canada. And in fact, a lot of them now looking at, well, maybe we should put our dollars into the United States and not invest in Canada. I think in Europe and Germany, it's different because you don't have the same sort of pressures as a country so heavily linked to the United States as Canada. But still, I think the German government would want to maintain their corporate taxes. I think they want to look at whether they should be looking more carefully at some of the rules to make sure that the base is not eroded. They may want to tighten up in those, but then they should also use the revenue to cut the corporate rate more, because the German rate is relatively high by international standards. And that also takes some of the pressure off of businesses trying to push costs into Germany.
Thank you very much.
My pleasure.